I know what you're thinking. What are these two doing on my phone screen on a Tuesday night? But we are here because of some breaking news this evening. The New England Patriots pretty active in the trade market. Welcome to this Patriots Pulse Special. Patriots trade Keion White and Kyle Duggar. I'm your host, John Sirenitas. As always, I'm joined by my partner, John Lyons. Patriots today also extending Marcus Jones, 3 years, $36 million. We'll get to that. But, John, the reason we're doing the show tonight, two big trades by the Patriots, trading two guys that were staples of the Belichick era and even the Mayo era last year. Two guys that were supposed to be foundational pieces in Keion White and Kyle Duggar. Keion White was traded to the San Francisco 49ers for 2026 6th and 7th round pick. And Kyle Duggar was traded about a half hour ago to the Pittsburgh Steelers for 2026 6th and 7th round pick. So first things first, I just want to get your initial thoughts on the two trades. And then the next question I have for you is, did the Patriots get enough?
This to me, John, feels like scheme trades, if you will, because it feels like Kyle Duggar. Let's not forget, Kyle Duggar signed an extension last offseason to stay here when I thought Gerard Mayo was going to be the coach for a while. And he signs an extension, and I didn't think he played well last year at all. And I know he had the injury, but he did not look good. Then in training camp this year, you and I were down there. It didn't take long before both Jalen Hawkins and Craig Woodson passed him by. We talked about that on our training camp shows. And it was interesting because the very first snap of the season against the Raiders, he was in there and they went with three safeties and he was on the field. And then they pulled him off right after that. And he really struggled to find playing time since then. Really, his playing time came the last few weeks when Jalen Hawkins was out. And then Hawkins comes back against the Browns. He looks good. Craig Woodson, still a bit of a work in progress, but there's a lot of athleticism there. I think there's a good player there that's, working his way into being an NFL player. So it makes Duggar expendable. Like, this is a three-corner nickel team. It's not a three-safety team like it was under Belichick or even under Covington to an extent. And I think Keion White is a very similar thing because he's 6'5", 285. He's super powerful, but he's not as much of a speed guy. In this scheme, Chason is a speed guy. Landry's not a super speed guy, but he knows the scheme and Vrabel really well, and he has got speed to his game. And you can't really put Keion White inside as much because you have a $100 million player in Milton Williams who's really good and another highly paid, really good player in Christian Barmore and even Kyrus Tonga. I know it's a different role, but in recent weeks has emerged. So it just felt like both of these trades to me were more about the scheme the Patriots are trying to run on defense than even the two players themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is strictly about scheme. And really, you've seen it throughout this season so far where neither guy, even though they were on the roster, they didn't carve out a role for themselves. They didn't really fit in. And you bring up an interesting point with Keion White, and it really does come down to speed. That's the bottom line. He's more of a guy that's your traditional 9-technique defensive end in a one-gap defense. It's going to get his hands on people, squeeze the tight end or the tackle down, secure the gap, and then play down the line. He's not a guy that's going to win with speed off the ball. He's not a guy that plays with natural bend and an ability to plant and redirect, whereas Harold Landry, Caleb Chason can do that. He's not that kind of player. Now, I will say this. I'm not sure he got a fair shake in this scheme. He repped a bunch in the spring. He repped a bunch in camp. But once the season came around, he really fell out of favor, and he really fell out of favor quick. And I'm not looking to stir the pot here, John, but something tells me that this wasn't strictly an on-field move. I get the sense that there might have been a little bit of a personality clash here potentially between him and Vrabel or him and the staff. And again, I'm not trying to say that White was problematic or he was so problematic that they had to trade him. But I have a hard time believing a player with those measurables that you just mentioned, a guy who I do think can fit in the scheme, at least in my opinion, not that it matters, I find it hard to believe that it was all about his play on the field or the fit in the defense. I get the sense that there might have been more to it than that, because if you remember, he was very outspoken at the end of last season. Look, I've been around Keion White the last 2 years. I've spoken to him a bunch in that locker room. Keion wears it on his sleeve, man. He was one of my go-to guys last year that I would talk to one-on-one after games. First of all, he was never shy about talking to the media. and he wore it on his sleeve, and I felt we had a good rapport. And the other thing I'll say is the beginning of this season, when I tried to get him one-on-one, he's like, nah, man, I don't feel like talking. I'm good. And that wasn't like him the last 2 years. He was always willing to talk to anybody that came in the room. He was always very willing to express himself. And all of a sudden, he goes from a guy who's willing to tell it like it is, like he did last season, to a guy that now is avoiding the media and doesn't want to talk. So, again, I'm not looking to stir the pot here. I'm not looking to start a rumor, but I get the sense that this might have been more than just scheme fit.
And it's interesting, of the two guys, like Duggar is the one that makes much more sense to me, right? I mentioned the fit, and
100%.
he hadn't played as well. Like Keion White, and I talked about this last week. I've talked about it in the past. I feel like he was too good a football player to just give up on in trade. So that's and look, I think he will do pretty well in San Francisco with that style of defense, and it's a new opportunity for him. And like I said, I don't think he was going to play over Chason or over Landry or over Williams or over Barmore, but I wish they could have found a way to work him in as part of that. Like I mentioned, 6'5", 285. He also had a relative athletic score that was 14th among defensive linemen since 1987 when he came out in the draft. Like, this is a really not a speed guy, but a really athletic guy overall. And I just, again, maybe it was a run defense thing too, because he's been a great pass rusher at times, but we haven't seen it consistently enough. And he was kind of a so-so run defender at times. But he's the one guy that I look at of the moves they've made, because let's not forget, they moved on from Jawan Bentley and Jonathan Jones in the offseason, other guys who were big parts of the defense in previous years. White's the one guy I look at him like, man, I think there is a good football player in there. It just didn't seem to fit with this scheme, and it wasn't working out. I mean, he was a healthy scratch against the Browns on Sunday.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of tells you everything you need to know. And I said on Sunday, I wish they could find a way to work this out, because I think he is a talented player. It just didn't seem to quite fit with the Vrabel scheme and staff and guys. And again, so that I guess they made a decision to move on. But that was the one. Like the Duggar one, I think was a much easier call than the Keion White one.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And that's why I said I still think that there had to be more there than we think or we know, and we're probably ever going to know, and that's fine. They made the decision to move on. On the surface, yeah, it's a football move. He didn't fit. It was time to move on. But I just get the sense there was some stuff that was said in camp too. You know, White, again, a guy that wears it on his sleeve. Remember on August 25th, Vrabel comes out and he talks about he had to address questions about White fitting in and how's he fitting in and why isn't he repping as much? And he basically said, nope, you know, I love him. We had a really good chat. You know, he's going to have to play for us. We're going to need him. But ultimately, 2 months later, you didn't need him because you shipped him off to another team. So clearly, I mean, again, I think a big reason for this move is the fact that he's not an ideal scheme fit. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was also that he was probably pretty vocal about his role. He's not the kind of guy, at least from as far as I can tell being around him, not the kind of guy that would be shy to ask to speak to the head coach and find out, you know, why he isn't playing as much. I feel that he's that type of person, that type of player. So that could be part of it as well. To your point about Duggar, look, we saw it pretty early on. He wasn't going to fit this system.
Yeah.
He's not a
I think they would have
guy.
traded him or cut him if he didn't have that salary attached to him at the end of camp. And I said this at the end of camp, and I felt like he was too good a player to outright cut, because you could probably get some value there. I think the issue is like Pittsburgh, by the way, now Jabril Peppers and Kyle Duggar are both there. Another guy, Peppers, they let go from last year. But
San Francisco, now you have Mac Jones, Kendrick Bourne, and Keion White.
yeah, Patriots West, right?
Yeah, they love their former Patriots.
I guess so. But I felt like with Duggar, if he didn't have, what was it, the $9.3 or $4 million salary at the end of camp, we might have seen this trade in August. And it just, now 2 months go by, teams, you know, adjust their needs. The salary's prorated now for the rest of the year. So that's how you kind of, and again, I mean, we're talking about they're getting 6th and 7th round picks in return. It's not like they're trading these guys for day 1 or day 2 picks. So I think that, again, I think White was one they tried to make it work with and didn't. I think Duggar was basically, once Hawkins came back healthy and looked okay, they were like, all right, we're all set.
Yeah, and look, we heard this at the end of camp that the perception around the league is that these guys did not have a lot of value, that they weren't viewed as impact players that were going to come in and change the trajectory of a franchise. They were seen more as complementary pieces, which means that if they did in fact trade them, they weren't going to yield much of a return. And as we've seen tonight with both Keion White and Kyle Duggar, they didn't yield much of a return. Now, I wouldn't discount those 4 picks, because those 4 picks could potentially be valuable on day 2 and 3 when you're looking to move around and go up or down or potentially acquire future assets. So those picks do have value. One thing we can all say is that when it comes to draft picks, the NFL draft, those picks have more values than any of the other leagues in many ways, right? Like, especially those late round picks have more value.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to move around. Yeah.
Yeah, so they'll come in handy. And at the end of the day, you got those picks for 2 players that weren't scheme fits and you weren't playing anyway. And the rest of the league saw an opportunity, so they pounced and they acquired both of them. But what did surprise me, John, is the flurry of these moves, right? Like, you kind of can sense on Sunday after the game, when the media was in the locker room, a bunch of us were standing around, and one of the topic of conversations was, could this be it for Keion White? He was nowhere to be found on Sunday, wasn't around after the game. Duggar wasn't around. You started to get the sense that with the trade deadline, essentially a week away, it's a week from today, with the trade deadline a week away, you kind of got the sense that this could be it for Keion White. As it turns out, it was it for Keion White and Kyle Duggar.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's a coincidence or not. Tuesday, right? All the players are off, so they got the deal done on that day, and Tuesday night too. And just, peek into the coaching world, Tuesday's the busiest day for the head coach in the NFL game plan wise. I mean, he's there for 14, 15, 16 hours. Maybe Vrabel, you get to 7:38 at night. He's getting the game plan kind of mostly wrapped up, and then he can kind of turn because I know there's been questions. Is it Ryan Cowden? Is it Stretch? Is it Elliott Wolf? Is it Vrabel? Who's making the decisions? I think Vrabel has input and he's in on it. And maybe later on Tuesday was a time where you get the game plan done or close to done. You have time to address that stuff. So maybe that played into it. I mean, also too, it's October 28th. You're 8 games in. So this gives Duggar and White an opportunity for a second half of the year somewhere else, but it gives the Patriots time before the trade deadline. So let's say they go out and one of their safeties gets hurt or starts not playing well, one of their edge guys gets hurt or starts not playing well, then they can bolster that position. If they waited till the deadline for this and then there was an injury or somebody fell off a cliff, then you'd be kind of in a tough spot. So this does give them a little bit of breathing room before the trade deadline too.
Yeah, and it remains to be seen how active they're going to be now, right? I mean, you're in it. You win on Sunday, you're 7-2. If you feel that you have a couple of need areas, you have to be active. You have to be aggressive, right?
And I would think too, even if you lose on Sunday, you're still 6-3 with a win over the Bills. Like,
it's still in prime position to make the playoffs.
Exactly. So, and I think this team is very matchup dependent come playoff time, right? Like there's certain teams like the Chiefs right now, they're playing really well. You feel like they can go to most places and win a game, and they can win a game against most teams. And I think the Bills in years past, you've kind of felt that way, unless of course they're playing the Chiefs, but you felt like they could beat most teams in most places. The Joe Burrow Bengals when they were actually healthy. Now with the Patriots, like I feel like if they got the Bills at home in a playoff game, I would pick them to win. I don't know if I'd pick them to go win in Buffalo again, right? I would probably pick the Chiefs to beat them either way. The Chargers, it might depend on who's home, who's away. I would say the same thing if the Patriots played the Colts. So they're kind of, I think, matchup. Like I think the Broncos would be a bad matchup for the Patriots in the playoffs. Whereas, I think maybe the Chargers, who I just mentioned, beat a little bit of a better one, depending on how seeding fell. So I think they're very matchup dependent, maybe location dependent to an extent in the playoffs. So if you can bolster your roster and kind of help those odds between now and then, because let's be honest too, Drake May over the past month has played at about an MVP level. Is he really going to do that all the way through the playoff? And if he does, tip your cap to him. He's the MVP. I think it's reasonable to expect he might regress a little bit to the mean and still be a top 10 quarterback, but maybe not an MVP quarterback. So if you can do something to bolster that as you go forward, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I agree. And again, like I said earlier, these picks are going to have value. You're not going to see the value now, but you will see it down the road. So look, you knew that if they were going to trade either guy, they were going to have to take 25 to 50 cents on the dollar. That's exactly what happened. You weren't going to get a day 2 pick for either guy, particularly Duggar with his limitations in that contract. They're lucky to get what they got. Pittsburgh obviously sees themselves as a contender, as they should. The AFC, that the league in itself is wide open. But again, you mentioned them prorating the salary now. Now it's a more palatable salary for them to take on. They can stomach taking on the rest of that salary. Again, it remains to be seen how much of a future either guy's going to have in their new situation. But I think ultimately it's a good opportunity for those guys to get a fresh start somewhere else, get an opportunity to play. And it's a good opportunity for the Patriots to evaluate the rest of their roster and decide what they want to do and don't want to do next week. Now, I do want to talk about how much of these 2 trades create opportunities for other guys. So who benefits from these 2 trades, starting with, I should say, Keion White?
Yeah, so first, I do think Keion White going to San Francisco benefits him and the 49ers. Like, I could see him playing well there. I think here, I don't know if you're going to see a drastic change with Keion because he wasn't really I mean, again, healthy scratch on Sunday. Like, maybe Anthony Jennings gets all the, because I think before, like, Anthony Jennings was getting more reps than Keion White, but White was getting some of those. Maybe now Jennings gets all of them, or they bring someone else in, those kind of rotational.
Well, I was thinking reps. Elijah Ponder could potentially now start to play some snaps in sub packages.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I feel like Ponder, once every couple of weeks, there's like a flash there, and you're like, all right, maybe there's something there, and then it's kind of quiet after. Maybe this opens him up, and I think something to continue to pay attention to. We talked about this in March, John. Milton Williams has been great so far this year. He played less than 50% of the snaps in Philly last year. So far, he's held up well, but you got 9 more games left. Is he going to continue to hold up well? Are they going to have to rotate him a little bit more? Christian Barmore missed almost all of last year with an injury. They need to make sure he's fresh for December and January as well. So does that open up? Does all of a sudden Tonga start playing more and more snaps to kind of spell those guys at time? And that was an area that, again, I thought Keion White could have helped with. So I think Keion
Corey Durden too was played pretty well for them.
So I mean, I think the Duggar trade is more the one that might, quote unquote, open opportunity. Like, Hawkins was your starting safety, Woodson was your starting safety. I think this is a clear declaration though. It'd be nice if I could say that. I think this is a clear declaration that they are a 3-corner team, right? It's Gonzo. It's and think about, for years, Belichick would be a 3-corner team, but then he shifted and he was a 3 safety team at times. Now I think, look, you're going to have Gonzo on the outside. You're going to have Davis on the other outside. Alex Austin is backing those 2 guys up. And you just signed Marcus Jones to an extension today. He's going to be your slot guy, and he's a damn good slot corner. He's going to be it. So I think that's where you're going to see, like, to me, this Duggar trade kind of solidifies that. Like, you are a 3-corner team with Hawkins and Woodson as your 2 safeties.
Yeah. No, I agree. They're going to be a traditional nickel defense when it comes to their sub packages. They'll get into some dime stuff too, but ultimately, this is a more traditional scheme than what you saw under Belichick and what you saw under Mayo last year and Covington. That was more of a multiple scheme where you could get some 40 stuff, you could get some 30 stuff. This is primarily a 40 front defense that's going to play nickel. They're going to play some dime. They're going to try to match up. Sure, they'll get into some other fronts. They'll get into some 30 stuff. You saw it the other day. They got into some under and over stuff. But by and large, they want to play in that 4-man front. They want to play those wide 5 tilt techniques, and they want to 1 gap and reset the line of scrimmage like we've been saying all offseason. In this scheme, it's not about controlling gaps. It's about taking gaps, and they've been able to do that so far. And clearly, again, Keion White didn't fit that vision, okay? Kyle Duggar, obviously, in the secondary didn't fit that vision. And to your point earlier, John, Duggar especially didn't fit the vision. He couldn't play over the top, couldn't play in the middle of the field, not really much of a cover guy, not that he has been throughout his career. And let's face it here. I mean, look, he was a good box player, box safety, guy that can come
Yep.
down on a sky call and be the eighth guy in the box. Maybe he breaks the huddle as the eighth guy in the box, but he has never been a coverage guy.
Yeah.
Covering people has never been a strength for him, both in man-to-man coverage and in zone coverage, playing either over the top or playing a half off the hash. That has never been his game. So when you have a defense like this, where the safeties have to be athletic and be able to play over the top, especially in single high looks, you got to have guys with range that can flip their hips, make those baseball turns, and close on a receiver on the ball. That's not Kyle Duggar. He was never going to be that guy. That trade's not a surprise. Like I said, the White trade is a little bit of a surprise, but ultimately they cut their losses and they got something in return. And I think the other part of this that we should talk about is the fact that, and I'm not saying that he's trying to run Belichick guys out because there are still Belichick guys on the roster, but clearly this is Mike Vrabel saying our philosophy is different. The way we want to play is different. That's part of it. But the other part of it is you've got to fit the room. He addressed this the other day with Christian Barmore not playing in the first quarter. Basically, there's an expectation, there's a standard, and you have to meet it from a cultural standpoint. Do you think that part of the reason they made these two trades was, in fact, cultural? That not only were these guys not a scheme fit, but maybe they weren't a locker room fit either.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily like your point about Keion White earlier that you wouldn't be surprised if he had spoken up and expressed some frustration. Like I could see that. And maybe with Duggar that, but also like with Duggar, do you want a $9.5 million backup safety too? Like, does that really fit kind of your locker room and what you're trying to do there? Because to your point, like there's plenty of and not as
By the
many as
way,
there,
not to cut you off, Duggar, complete opposite from Keion White. Duggar didn't say boo. You
yeah.
barely got anything out of him in media scrums, or even if you got him one-on-one. I mean, half the time, look, nice kid, very nice young man, but half the time you're like, dude, speak up. So complete opposite of Keion White.
And I think what we've seen of the Belichick guys they've kept, it's guys that are either really great scheme fits or supremely talented players. Like Mike Onwenu, and I know there's times like the Saints game where he didn't play well. He is a really talented guy. Christian Barmore, really talented guy. Anthony Jennings, I think, is a great locker room guy. Maybe not a great scheme fit, but pretty
Well, that's what I was
talented.
going to ask you when you mentioned him, though. Could he potentially, and I'm just throwing this out there, I'm not saying he should. He's played a bunch on special teams.
Yeah.
He's starting to carve out more of a role for himself in the defense. You've seen him play more snaps in recent weeks. But all that being said, could he potentially be the next guy out?
Maybe, but I think he's got a higher chance to stick around because of the special team stuff you mentioned. And another guy, too, that's worth mentioning, and we haven't so far, is Marte Mapu. And I feel like
took
he's
the words right out of my mouth.
And I feel like last year there were 3 guys on the whole team that got better, which is kind of an indictment of the coaching staff. And it was Drake May, Joe Milton, and Marte Mapu. Those are the only 3 guys that I thought demonstrably got better over the course of last year. And it feels like Mapu is like that role we talked about with Duggar, that box role kind of coming downhill. Mapu can kind of do that, and he's a little more. I think he's probably a faster player than Duggar anyway. So, like, it's kind of redundant in that sense. Where, like, think about it, if you're them and you're going to go 3 corners with 2 safeties, and then you have Spillane. If you want a hybrid guy next to Spillane, let's say you don't want Tavai on the field, well, do you want Duggar or Mapu? And I think they're at a point where they'd rather have Mapu on the field. I mean, we saw it Cleveland in the Cleveland game. Mapu was on the field playing snaps on defense. So I don't know. Maybe his I don't want to call it an emergence because he's like hasn't done that much, but his improvement, I wonder if that factored in a little bit too.
Oh, 100%. I think the other thing that's important to point out here is that in this defense, you want guys that actually fit the position. In Belichick's defense, and even Covington last year, which was basically the same scheme, those guys valued versatility more. They wanted guys that were more of those 3-by-3 safeties that can play all 3 downs at all 3 levels. Whereas Vrabel, Zach Kerr, Coach T, they value guys that are more positional guys, meaning Jalen Hawkins is more of a free safety than just a safety or a strong safety. He can play over the top.
Yeah.
He has range at single high and 2 high looks. Craig Woodson is more of that 3-by-3 safety. But again, in this scheme, I think they want guys that are going to play the position that they're in. They don't necessarily need Keion and Landry to be drop guys into coverage. Same thing with their tackles. They want them to be pure to the position. And I think that's another part of it as well.
And I think the defensive line, that's a bigger change than the secondary, because I think when Belichick's defense was at its best, a lot of the guys in the secondary had defined roles, right? Whether it was McCourty was your free safety, Chung was the box guy, Jonathan Jones was slot corner, and you had whether it was Gilmore and Jason McCourty or, Malcolm Butler, whoever on like those guys, even you go back to the original Super Bowl teams, right? Lawyer Malloy was more your box midfield safety. Tabucky Jones was a free safety. Like you can go Rodney Harrison to but on the defensive line, I think you would see a lot more move. Like, remember they would move Vince Wilfork all over the place on the defensive. Like Richard Seymour might always be on one end, but a lot of the other guys would move around. And then even in recent years, we would see a lot of movement with Kyle Van Noy and guys like that up front. So I think for the secondary,
and Van Noy is a classic example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and Akeem Ayers as well. When he came in 2014, they moved. He was rushing the passer and dropping in coverage all the time that year after they traded for him. So I wonder, like the secondary to me, I don't think it's as big a change, but up front, like Keion White was drafted to move all over the place and rush from inside, rush from the edge, stand up, hand down, all that stuff. Whereas you look at it now, like Keion is a defensive end coming off the edge almost all the time. Harold Landry is a defensive end coming off the edge almost all the time. So it's just, again, and it's not right or wrong. I just think that speaks to the differences and why those guys were an easier fit than Keion White.
Yeah, and that's just it. And going back to White, too, let's not forget that in that 2023 draft, he was projecting as a late first-round pick. Yeah. Him falling into the second round and them taking him at 46 was a steal. So you got a first-round talent at that pick because he slipped, and he slipped primarily because of age. He had played at Old Dominion, and then he ended up transferring to Georgia Tech. Patriots draft him out of Georgia Tech. But if you go back to that draft, you get Gonzalez with your first-round pick, Keion White with your second-round pick. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and don't forget Kayshon Boutte and Demario Douglas on day 3, which looks pretty good. It's funny, too, because Belichick drafted really poorly.
Belichick guys.
Yeah, but he drafted really poorly from 2017 to 2022, and it killed him by the end of his tenure. Looks like the last draft he had, and I know we'll see what Keion White does in San Francisco, but the last draft he had was actually not bad. So
no, not bad at all.
I mean, you got Gonzo, you got Boutte, you got Douglas, and then, like I said, we'll see what Keion White can do. And even, hey, Chad Ryland missed a field goal against the Giants that got you Drake May. So, maybe even that.
There you go, and he's carved out a nice little career for himself.
Yeah, actually, he doesn't suck. Yeah.
No. The other big news of the day, of course, was the Patriots extending cornerback Marcus Jones to a 3-year, $36 million contract. I must admit, Lions, I was surprised, not so much at the term. The term is standard, but I was surprised at that number. Aren't you a little surprised that they gave him $12 million a year? And I know, again, you're not just paying him as a corner, you're also paying him as a returner. But I was a little surprised by that number.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be 15 a year. I actually thought it was going to be more because
really?
I
thought
did
it would have been in the 8 to 10 range.
See, I now look, he did miss, what was it, 2023, he missed the whole year with injury. So he had an injury year that he was out, but he's established. I mean, at average return yard, he is the number 1 punt returner in the NFL. And that's not a fluke. He's been a great punt returner his whole career. So he's one of, if not the best punt returners in the league. But I think what's really advanced him is I feel like his coverage skills this year have taken a step forward. I think the skills were always there. Remember, he won the Paul Hornung Award when he was in college, the most versatile player in college football. The skills were always there. But again, 2022, he was working his way in. 23, misses the year with injury. Last year, he's coming back from injury. This year, he's been really good in coverage. I mean, from start to finish, you could make the case he's been their best cover corner all year long. Because again, Gonzo missed time with injury. Carlton Davis has been pretty good, but little penalty prone in that role. That's why, to me, I think they're projecting him forward as a top 5 slot corner in the league and a top 5 punt returner in the league. So honestly, I thought it was going to be 50. I thought it was going to be 3 years and 45 with, somewhere in the 30s guaranteed, or 3 at 50 with somewhere in the mid to high 30s guaranteed. So actually, he got a little less than I thought he might.
Yeah, well, see, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a little surprised that he got as much as he did. But to your point, you could see why he got as much as he did.
Yeah.
And look, in this day and age where you're in nickel defense is about roughly 60% of the time, you're not sitting in base that much anymore. When you're nickel about 60% of the time, like where the league is right now, from an average snap standpoint, you could see why he's a $12 million a year player. And you factor in the punt return aspect. As you mentioned, he leads the league in punt return yard average. I mean, again, it just goes to show you why he got paid. And then above all else,
Captain too.
he's a captain. He's a great presence in the locker room. He has really stepped into that Matthew Slater role as the unassuming, quiet, professional leader of the team. He's great to deal with from a media standpoint. He's well respected by his coaches, his teammates, members of the media. I mean, he has really carved out a nice career for himself here in New England. And clearly, the Patriots valued him and decided that he's worth extending. And again, this runs counter to what I said earlier. Could this be a case of him wanting to get some of these Belichick guys out? There are plenty of Belichick guys on the roster that are going to be counted on this year to make plays and help this football team win that are still here. I think ultimately what it comes down to is scheme fit, but also remember, Vrabel's a former player. He recognizes the value of playing. And I'm sure in his mind, he's thinking, look, if we're not going to play Keion White as much as we thought we were going to play him, we can't play Kyle Duggar as much as we should or want to because he's not a good scheme fit. If we can't play these guys as much as they deserve to play, part of our thought process is let's give them an opportunity to go somewhere else and play.
Yeah, and I think and you look at where they traded him to, right? San Francisco, good defense, well-respected coaching staff. Pittsburgh speaks for itself as far as where their coaching staff is respect-wise, and they're a good team. So, maybe that played into it a little bit. I don't know. But it feels like both of those places are good fits, especially in Keion White's case. But Duggar, too, it feels like both of those destinations are pretty good fits for the two players they dealt as well.
Yeah, and of course, the Steelers are trying to replace Minkah Fitzpatrick, who they traded to the Miami Dolphins for Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith, old friend Jonnu Smith. But they haven't been able to replace Fitzpatrick in the middle of their defense. And Jalen Ramsey, he's clearly starting to show his age. He hasn't been as good as he was a couple of years ago. So that's part of it as well. Again, old friend Jabril Peppers is there as well. But I do think, and again, I'm not trying to stir the pot here. I do think, though, that when you make moves like this, yes, a big part of it is scheme fit. Yes, a big part of it is accommodating the player. But another part of this is locker room fit. If you're paying a guy $9.4 million a year, to your point earlier, he can't be a backup safety. He has to be an impact player. That's too much money to have invested in a guy who's playing in sub packages and special teams. He's got to be able to do more. So that's part of it. And in the case of Keion White, again, there could have potentially been some disgruntled sentiment there where he said, hey, look, if you're not going to play me, trade me. Again, I don't want to put words in his mouth or anybody else's, but that might have been the case knowing his history of being an outspoken, upfront, and honest player. He might have had a real conversation with Vrabel, and they ultimately made the decision to move on from him.
Yeah, and you remember, was it the spring when Keion White was like, I have a real coach now? Like, so he was excited for him at first, and unfortunately, and
even at the end of last season, if you remember, John, he was looking forward to a coaching change. And it's not,
he was right.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, like,
right.
what the things he said, it was maybe, things maybe don't say public, but I remember hearing his comments about, hey, somebody's got to be held accountable for this. And I'm like, yeah, man, I kind of agree with you, right? So I don't know. It's just I wish that had worked out better because I think there is a really good football player in there in Keion White
and a guy that I think could be a leader on your football team. So yeah. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I wish it worked out better as well.
Yeah, like Duggar again. I mean, you got a couple good seasons out of him, and then he got passed by whatever. But Keion White, that's one that I'm like, man, I wish that could have worked out a little better.
Both, of course, were second-round picks. You would have liked to have gotten a little bit more back. But again, ultimately, given the fact that you weren't playing them, given the money factor in Duggar's case, again, you had to know going into this, at best, you're getting 50 cents on the dollar.
Right.
They weren't going to get a real return for either player. But this is going to create an opportunity now to play some of these other guys. You mentioned Mapu. I mentioned Elijah Ponder. Some of these other guys are going to get an opportunity. And the other thing to keep in mind here now is I still think the Patriots The Patriots aren't done. I think you're going to see the other side of things where I think potentially they could add here in the next week or so. You could see a veteran defensive back coming back in return. You could see another defensive lineman potentially coming back, maybe a veteran running back. I don't think they're done here. I don't think they're going to go crazy, but I can see them adding a couple of pieces here.
I would agree, and I think you like running back, now that Henderson had that good game against the Browns, if he can do it again against the Falcons, maybe it pushes that need down a little bit, but, I mean, I'd like somebody at linebacker, maybe another edge guy they feel is a good fit to their scheme. You can never have enough rotational offensive linemen too, I'm just saying,
Right.
but, uh, because it's tough. I
I
don't think
I'll take it a step further. You might need another defensive tackle too, John. Right now, you're
well, to our
rotating.
point earlier about Milton Williams and Barmore.
Jordan's playing a lot more than I think that they even thought he was going to play, and he's been good for them. So you do have 4 guys there, but I wouldn't be surprised if they added another body inside.
Yeah, and when I look at, like, their overall needs, like, they still need a legit number 1 wide receiver. Tight end is gonna be a need in the future, but, like, to me, those are off season. Like, there's nobody in season
Yeah, you're
that
not
you're
making that wide receiver trade now.
or the tight end one now. Like, that's just not I don't see that right now. Like, the impact linebacker, like, when the Ravens traded for Roquan Smith in season, was it 4 or 5 years ago, whatever? You're not I just don't see the guy available for that trade. So I think it'll be something more on the margins, maybe a defensive tackle that can alleviate some of the Milton Williams, Barmore snaps, maybe an edge guy that can alleviate some of Harold Landry snaps, maybe a back, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, again, they could potentially make a couple moves, but I wouldn't expect a big splash because the other thing to keep in mind here is especially if you're talking about adding salary, you've got some big decisions to make here in the next couple of years. You got to extend Gonzalez. Eventually, you're going to have to extend May. And May, at the way, if May continues to develop at this pace and he continues to play at this level, you're talking about a guy that's probably going to cost you $60 million a year.
He's gonna be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL if
Yeah,
he continues at
if
this
not
level.
top 3 for sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're going to need to save your pennies here in the coming years, which is why the Gonzalez situation will be interesting to watch because he's elite at his position. He's top 3, in my opinion, at his position. But what do you pay him? And are you going to be willing to break the bank to pay him, knowing that eventually you're going to have to pay your quarterback? That's going to be worth monitoring because they've got a lot of money tied up at some of these positions: defensive tackle, wide receiver,
Tight end
edge,
even. Yeah.
tight end even. Right. So now all of a sudden, if Gonzalez is coming in at 25 million a year, let's say, that's a big chunk of change. And then you got to think about what you're going to do at the quarterback position. The Gonzalez situation, I think, is going to be worth watching because they may financially be stretched out too thin to make it work with both of those contracts. All right, John, final thoughts here before we wrap up this Patriots Pulse Special. Patriots trading Keion White and Kyle Duggar.
Yeah, I think both of these trades, neither one is surprising, but the Keion White one is the one that maybe they could come to regret if he really balls out in San Francisco. But I think this was more about a scheme fit for both of those guys than anything else. I mean, hopefully they can have good rest of their careers at their next stops. I mean, it's okay value back. It's not great value, but like you said earlier, you weren't playing these guys anyway, and you got something for them. So to me, this is mostly trying to get some value back for some guys that just didn't really fit in the scheme they were trying to run.
Yeah, ultimately that's really what it comes down to. And now, if nothing else, you can have some draft flexibility day 3 to move around the board. You could potentially parlay those picks into an additional 5th or even an additional 4th. You're going to be able to move around and add some impact players that are better fits in this current scheme and what they want to do. All right, well, that'll do it for this Patriots Pulse Special. Again, Patriots trade defensive end Keion White to the San Francisco 49ers for a 2026 6th and 7th round pick. And they trade safety Kyle Duggar to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a 2026 6th and 7th round pick. That'll do it for this Patriots Pulse Special. For John Lyons, I'm John Serenitas. We'll talk to you at the end of the week.